Hey everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Is It Worth Saving? A podcast where we seek the answers to my most burning questions of right this minute. My name is Michael, and I am what you would call an uneducated man, hoping to change that over the course of this podcast. Today's topic is actually the reason that I created this whole podcast. Now, you see, to give a bit of backstory, I live in the state of Colorado currently. I've not always lived here. I've only been here for a few years. Now, one of the things different from here in this state as opposed to any other state I've ever lived in before is the voting system. Voting by mail is the default. They mail out informational packets that tells you what you'll be voting on, as well as supplying information from both sides on the vote and what that means. That is completely different from anywhere that I ever lived before, where you have to go yourself in person, stand in line. It's a whole thing. I came from Georgia. If you've heard that was a whole thing, to the point where it became plot points in shows like Curb Your Enthusiasm, I'm sure others as well, but Georgia voting was already a whole nonsensical, not being able to give people water. Anyway, a whole thing. Completely different from that. But that does bring us to the Colorado vote of November 2024, Proposition 127, to prohibit bobcat, lynx, and mountain lion hunting. Now, at this point, let's reveal my bias. For the past almost 10 years, I've made it beyond just a hobby of going out into nature to observe and document all kinds of wildlife with a camera. It's kind of the main thing that I do. And to that end, I'm kind of against the unnecessary killing of animals, just regardless. So right off the bat, let's mark that down for what it's worth. When I was flipping through this voting info booklet, the first time I've ever seen anything like this, and I saw this Proposition 127, I was surprised. I read through the whole thing repeatedly. It kind of sent me on a path that I should really learn more about this subject. I've already done some reading on the subject in the past, but certainly not in any kind of special way besides random curiosity and then move on. So in the brain, out the brain, pretty much like every other subject, and just the way that we all live currently, or at least the way I know people live and the people in my life. I don't want to speak broadly for everyone, but anyway, here's this podcast. That's the whole reason. I want to make it stick in my brain instead of just floating in and floating back out. So, Proposition 127. There's a pretty good amount of info here in this booklet. We should read through all of it, honestly, but it's about 3.5 pages, and there are parts where, does reading a full URL to a website really help? But anyway, we're going to read directly from that. Proposition 127, prohibit bobcat, lynx, and mountain lion hunting, placed on the ballot by Citizen Initiative, passes with a majority vote. Proposition 127 proposes amending the Colorado statutes to prohibit the hunting or trapping of bobcats, lynx, and mountain lions, continue to permit the killing of these animals under certain circumstances, and establish penalties for violations. Then it has a section saying what your vote means. Yes, a yes vote on Proposition 127 would make it illegal to hunt bobcats, lynx, and mountain lions in Colorado. A no vote on Proposition 127 would continue to allow the hunting of bobcats and mountain lions as it is currently regulated by the state. Hunting lynx would remain illegal under state and federal law. There's a section here that is a summary and analysis of Proposition 127. Proposition 127 would prohibit intentionally killing, wounding, pursuing, entrapping, or discharging a deadly weapon at bobcats, lynx, and mountain lions in Colorado. While the measure uses the term trophy hunting, it bans all hunting, pursuing, or entrapping of bobcats, lynx, and mountain lions regardless of intent. Individuals convicted of any of these activities are subject to up to 364 days in jail, a fine of $1,000, or both, a 5-year prohibition on holding a license issued by Colorado Parks and Wildlife, CPW, with more stringent penalties for subsequent convictions. Would there still be instances where these animals could be killed lawfully? Certain scenarios are not unlawful under the measure and thus are not prohibited, including when bobcats, lynx, or mountain lions are killed in the defense of human life, livestock, personal property, or a motor vehicle, by an employee or contractor of any federal, state, or local agency acting in an official capacity or with a special license from CPW, including to manage animals that pose a threat to agricultural resources, as a result of an accident involving a motor vehicle, vessel, or train, or for scientific research or humane euthanasia. How is hunting regulated in Colorado? CPW is responsible for wildlife management in Colorado and administers regulations for hunting, fishing, and trapping as adopted by the Colorado Parks and Wildlife Commission. State law requires wildlife and their environment to be protected, preserved, and enhanced, and managed for the use, benefit, and enjoyment of the people and visitors of Colorado. CPW manages individual animal species differently and uses regulated hunting, fishing, and trapping to meet management goals. Table 1 discusses the differences between bobcat, lynx, and mountain lions and the different hunting regulations associated with each. So the next page is a table that it mentioned, Table 1. As it goes through, there's a bunch of information on here. We don't necessarily need all of it, like description of the animals. If you don't know what a bobcat, a lynx, or a mountain lion looks like, you could look that up. But there are some interesting things here, such as the species conservation status. Bobcats are not currently classified as threatened in Colorado or in the United States. Their exact number is uncertain, but Colorado's bobcat population is considered widespread across the state, stable, and possibly increasing in some areas. Now, the lynx, also called the Canada lynx, is currently listed as endangered in Colorado, threatened under federal law. Colorado began its effort to reintroduce lynx in 1999 and now has what is considered a stable population. Mountain lions, not currently classified. There's estimated 3,800 to 4,400 mountain lions in the state, which is considered a stable population. It also talks about hunting regulations, where they must have specific hunter education certification to buy a hunting license for bobcats and mountain lions. CPW limits when, where, and how many, and the way that mountain lions can be hunted each year. Same thing with bobcats. No, there is no limit on how many bobcats can be hunted, but their pelts must be inspected and tagged by CPW. Interesting. Now, lynx, because of their protected status, state and federal law currently prohibits all hunting and trapping of lynx, punishable by fines, imprisonment, or hunting license suspension. And then statistics. From 2020 to 2023, an average of 880 bobcats are harvested per year. From 2023, an average of 500 mountain lions. There have been no reported kills of lynx in Colorado. Interesting. The next section that they say is, how would this measure change reimbursements for big game damage? Under current law, Colorado may provide reimbursement to landowners for damage to crops, fences, orchards, nurseries, personal property, or livestock caused by any big game species, including mountain lions. Colorado does not provide reimbursement for damage caused by lynx or bobcats. This measure would remove mountain lions from the definition of big game, making landowners ineligible for state reimbursement for any damage caused by a mountain lion. This next section is kind of what I was talking about with just the entire idea of how voting is handled. Not something in any of the other states I ever lived in, did we receive an informational packet that gave you arguments for or against, which is our next section here. Arguments for Proposition 127. Number 1. Bobcat and mountain lion hunting causes the animal pain and trauma. The hunting of mountain lions may involve the use of dog chases, while the hunting of bobcats may involve the use of baits, lures, or live traps. Hunting and trapping these animals, often for trophies or the commercial fur trade, is an unnecessary practice. Number 2, bobcat and mountain lion populations can naturally regulate themselves without the need for hunting or trapping, and there is no consistent evidence that banning these activities would create new dangers to the public. Big cats provide valuable ecological contributions, and Colorado should protect them rather than allowing them to be hunted. Where circumstances warrant it, federal, state, and local officials will still be allowed to protect human life with lethal and non-lethal methods. The arguments against. Number 1, this measure restricts the ability of wildlife management experts at CPW to make science-based decisions to achieve the state's ecological objectives, which include preserving biodiversity, ensuring sustainable ecosystems, and protecting endangered species. The state currently manages a healthy population of bobcats and mountain lions, proving that its current management practices, which include regulated hunting, are working. This measure undermines those objectives by disregarding the expertise and research necessary for effective wildlife management. Furthermore, hunting lynx is already illegal and the population is considered stable. Number 2, hunting mountain lions and bobcats provide an important source of income to the state wildlife management system and many local communities. Furthermore, agricultural producers and landowners will lose the ability to be reimbursed for any damage caused by a mountain lion. If a hunting ban results in an increased population of mountain lions, these damages may become more frequent and costly for those affected. Our final section here is fiscal impact of Proposition 127. State revenue. The measure is anticipated to decrease state revenue to CPW in the Department of Natural Resources by about $410,000 through June 2025 and about $450,000 per year thereafter. This revenue reduction is the result of the elimination of all mountain lion hunting licenses sales and some reduction of fur-bearer hunting license sales. To the extent that prohibited killing occurs, the state may receive additional revenue from fines or civil penalties. And then finally, state spending. This measure will decrease state expenditures in CPW by approximately $39,000 in FY, I guess that's full year 2024 to 25, and $77,500 in 25 to 26 and in future years. This is the result of a decrease in game damage claims paid to livestock owners where livestock is damaged by a mountain lion. In addition, state expenditures will increase by approximately $57,000 in 24 to 25, $115,000 in 25 to 26 in the Department of Law to provide general counsel to CPW. This is required to create new rules and regulations needed to conform with the requirements of this measure. In total, the measure increases state expenditures in CPW about $22,000, 24 to 25, and $44,000 in 2025 to 2026. And that's what I had in my informational booklet. That was a surprisingly thorough analysis to both sides of this. And that's completely unexpected to what I've experienced this far in my life. That's all the information that it took to plant this little nugget of an idea for a podcast, to start researching into these things and learning whatever I can. So, if we're going to start researching, where do we go? The internet. Wikipedia seems like a pretty good place to start, like we did last time. The entry page for hunting wildlife management says, hunting is claimed to give resource managers an important tool in managing populations that might exceed the carrying capacity of their habitat and threaten the well-being of other species, or in some instances, damage human health or safety. In some cases, hunting can actually increase the population of predators such as coyotes by removing territorial bounds that would otherwise be established, resulting in excessive neighboring migrations into an area, thus artificially increasing the population. Hunting advocates assert that hunting reduces intraspecific competition for food and shelter, reducing mortality among the remaining animals. Some environmentalists assert that reintroducing predators would achieve the same end with greater efficiency and less negative effect, such as introducing significant amounts of free lead into the environment and food chain. That little bit there about lead, that gun, bullets, lead, right? Lead bullets, they just, when you miss, when it goes into an animal, whatever the case may be, lead goes into that. I got a little confused by that as to what it is. I don't remember if we go over that, but that was something that I learned. But anyway, the wording on all that is pretty particular. It's claimed to be an important tool. Also on Wikipedia, it's noted that there are no sources for either side of the two things in there that it mentioned, which was hunting advocates or environmentalists. There's zero sources for either side of that. Or at least I should mention that it's noted there are no current sources at the time of this research. Now, around this point, I also did learn that there is a right to hunt clause in 22 U.S. states' constitution. Continuing to read, on the Wikipedia page for hunting, there's a section about environmental problems. I did go into it. Lead bullets that miss their target or remain in an unretrieved carcass could become a toxicant? Yeah, that's a word. In the environment, but lead in ammunition, because of its metallic form, has a lower solubility and higher resistance to corrosion than other forms of lead, making it hardly available to biological systems. Waterfowl and other birds may ingest the lead and poison themselves with the neurotoxicant, but studies have demonstrated that effects of lead in ammunition are negligible in animal population size and growth. Since 1991, U.S. federal law forbids lead shot in waterfowl hunts, and 30 states have some type of restriction. Interesting that they went, oh, it's negligible, yet it's still been outlawed. Anyway, continuing to read. In December 2014, a federal appeals court denied a lawsuit by environmental groups that the EPA must use Toxic Substance Control Act to regulate lead in shells and cartridges. The groups sought EPA to regulate spent lead, yet the court found the EPA could not regulate spent lead without also regulating cartridges and shells. Bummer. Continuing to read in the Wikipedia, we have the conservation section. Hunters have been driving forces throughout history in the movement to ensure the preservation of wildlife habitats and wildlife for further hunting. However, excessive hunting and poachers have also contributed heavily to the endangerment, extirpation, and extinction of many animals, such as the quagga, the great auk, Steller sea cow, the thylacine, the bluebuck, the Arabian ox, the Caspian and Yavan? I'm pretty sure it's not Javan tigers. I don't know. The markhor, the Sumatran rhinoceros. Wow, there's a bunch of these on here. It goes on for some time. All these animals have been hunted to endangerment or extinction. Poaching currently threatens bird and mammalian populations around the world. Mammalian. I've never had to say mammal as a as a group before like that. Sorry, reading. The 2019 Global Assessment Report on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services lists the direct exploitation of organisms, including hunting, as the second leading cause of biodiversity loss after land use for agriculture. In 2022, IPBES, did we already talk about who that was, or was that somewhere else? Sorry, I don't know if I have a source on what exactly IPBES means. It may have been on another part in the page. You can go to the Wikipedia page for it. The links will be in the description. They released another report which stated that unsustainable hunting, along with unsustainable logging and fishing, are the primary drivers of global extinction crisis. A 2023 study published in Bioscience posited that the prioritizing of hunting by state agencies in the United States over the rewinding of key species is reinforcing this loss of biodiversity. Also, yeah, we talked about that last time with planet Earth kind of going, downwards on many things, and one of them was the extinction crisis. Here's part of it. The Wikipedia page also goes into some of the species that hunting has eliminated entirely or come close and are currently endangered, but there's a whole list of them as we were just looking. So a little bit further down, another section on this Wikipedia page for hunting was the opposition. It has been argued by animal rights activists that killing animals for sport is unethical, cruel, and unnecessary. They note the suffering and cruelty inflicted on animals hunted for sport. Many animals endure prolonged, painful deaths when they are injured but not killed by hunters. Hunting disrupts migration and hibernation patterns and destroys families. Animal rights activists also comment that hunting is not needed to maintain an ecological balance and that nature takes care of its own. They say that hunting can be combated on public lands by spraying deer repellent or human hair from barbershops near hunting animals. Animal rights activists also argue that hunting is speciesist. Whether hunters try to justify their killing by citing human deaths caused by wild animals, by making conservationist claims, by claiming that it's acceptable to hunt as long as the animals' bodies are eaten, or simply because of the pleasure it brings them, the fact remains that hunting is morally unacceptable if we consider the interests of non-human animals. Hunted animals endure fear and pain, and then are deprived of their lives. Understanding the injustices of speciesism and the interests of non-human animals makes it clear that human pleasure cannot justify animals' pain. Non-human animals' pain. Sorry, missed a word there. So that last bit kind of reminded me something that I thought of from a long time ago when I was growing up. Do fish feel pain? I never considered that until I became an adult, somewhere in my mid-20s, and I started going out looking for wildlife. And I saw so many people fishing, and I got into it myself. We'll talk about that later. But that, I never even considered it. There's the term catch and release. That's fishing. That's a huge part of fishing, is just the catching of fish. But do they feel the pain of the hook? I've been told no. Like growing up, no, that's okay. Fish don't feel pain. They don't have a brain. Well, okay. One thing at a time here. I've been fishing a few times as a child, and then again, I got into it just before wildlife photography. I was kind of going out doing that stuff and getting into fishing with some friends of mine. I was already out in nature. They kind of went hand in hand. Hand in hand would be the term there. But we wound up catching a fish, which meant a hook right through its cheek. And it's bleeding. And we're getting out the hook, which is not easy to do on a fish that is obviously now out of water, and doing, look, we're beginners at it. We're not experts or whatever, but just like the whole time it felt wrong. I thought, surely this can't be right. There was another time where a friend caught a fish and it punctured their bladder, the thing that they use to stay buoyant. That's a dead fish. That fish can no longer survive. I gotta be honest, that really ruined it for me. I really wasn't in the act of fishing to harm another creature. That was not what I was looking for out of that. I liked it from the outside perspective, the casting of the line, being out there in the peaceful nature. I still think fly fishing is really cool. It looks neat. The arc is almost like an art form, the way you throw it out there. It reminds me of bullwhip cracking, but quiet. I put a lot of time into research if I could fly fish without a barbed hook, which, yes, you can. You're basically just feeding the fish, and you're basically not going to catch anything. And it's expensive. I never went down that route. But instead of me just trying to remember off the top of my head, it's time I actually looked into it a little bit further. There's a Wikipedia entry for pain in fish. Basically, it's contested. There's way more information than I can sum up here. Personally, I see fish bleeding and the way that they react to not being in water anymore and things hurting them with pokey things. But I think that's unnecessary harm, in my opinion. I no longer partake in that. I have no interest in fishing of any kind anymore. Now, that also reminds me of something that I experienced in my personal life. But I was watching a content creator online who I watch play video games. He makes great videos. I'll put basically he goes by Wumble, and I'll put his link in the description as well. But outside of video games entirely, he did these videos where he went out fishing. And now he did it like a first-person perspective with a camera on his chest and just talked and talked through everything. It was really interesting to see and incredible to see how they treat fishing in the UK. That's where he was from. It's very regulated. The food that you can give them, you can't give them anything that's going to hurt their diet or mess up the fish. You can't use hooks at all. You have to use hookless, so that you're not putting anything. There's certain ways, but you still have like antiseptic that you spray on them, how they have to treat the fish when they bring them out of the water. Like you weigh the fish, you measure the fish, you have to put them back. They're in special netting. It's a lot more work. And I remember reading through some of the comments about people being like, this is unnecessary. And I went, you probably live in the US. And other people being like, oh, wow, you did all these things correctly. That's good. I don't always see people. And I'm like, hey, that person's from the UK and they actually know all the rules. It's like stocked ponds. And anyway, really interesting. I found it just a breath of fresh air compared to what I've seen here, witnessed, and been a part of myself as far as fishing goes here. But still, it was amazing to watch. It really opened up like, wow, there is another side to this that doesn't always involve hurting the animal and taking all these extra steps to make sure that you do as little harm to them as possible, getting them out of their environment and back into it as quickly as possible. It's like, that seems like a way better way to do it. My own personal feelings on it. Now, anyway, let's bring it back to the cats and the proposition. I found a website, Ballotopedia. It talks about Colorado Proposition 127 and gives me a lot more information further reading. So that was where I kind of started. One of the major points that I'm seeing is how removing mountain lions from the classification of big game means that landowners would no longer be able to claim damage by mountain lion and get reimbursed. Remember, that was on the ballot. But to be clear, it's definitely still labeled in there that they can kill them if they're causing damage. This is also ludicrous. One of the arguments against the proposition is from Colorado's Wildlife Deserve Better. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but this bit specifically. This ballot measure would have a disproportionate impact on rural communities in Colorado and would no longer allow farmers to be reimbursed for any livestock losses caused by mountain lions. This ballot measure would have a significant negative impact on Colorado's economy, resulting in over $60 million in lost economic output. I'm sorry, hold on a minute. How did we get to $60 million in economic output when mountain lions only cause $50,000 a year in claim damage? Did you take that average number and multiply it by 1,200 years? I don't understand that number at all. I looked into that number more, found the state has to publish those numbers. It's majority livestock. I'll put a link for that as well. I get that part. I do understand no one wants to lose money. It's probably hard enough as it is to be a farmer. Realistically, $50K is kind of a drop in the bucket, though, and we'll get to that. But back to the proposition. There was this bit as well. The initiative is opposed by State Senator Perry Will, who said, ballot box biology is the absolute worst way you can manage wildlife. Our capable wildlife professionals are put in charge to manage our wildlife, but they feel the power to do this because that's how reintroducing wolves was passed. They would have done these things with wolverines if I hadn't put Sorry, I'm misreading that. They would have done it with wolverines if I wouldn't have put a bill in place, which is a better way to do these things. What? Okay. That was the end of the quote. I'm sorry, but just going off his comment, he thinks it's better that he puts a bill into place instead of people voting. Am I the only one who thinks that's weird? What? Now, to be fair, I understand it's not quite as cut and dry as just one person puts a bill in and there is still a vote. It's just not a public vote. But I also feel like the majority of people can and can't be informed about things. We're talking about the November 2024 election, and let's just say a lot of things the majority voted on that I didn't agree with. But in this instance, I just felt like the way that was put in place was weird. However, what he talked about was reintroducing the wolves, right? Let's go down. I've heard of that. Let's talk about that. I want to research that a little bit further. There is a Wikipedia entry for the history of wolves in Yellowstone. That's what we're talking about. I saw a documentary there was a documentary that went out. I watched that a couple years ago. It had some really cool effects, what they did. And I mean, like the effects on the environment. They put a top predator back into the mix, which kept the elk in check and the coyote, which has a trickle-down effect to things like berries being able to grow more because they're not being eaten by so much elk. But I'm just summarizing what I remember and what I found on the Wikipedia page. What I see on the Wikipedia page is how once the wolves were gone, the elk went rampant, overgrazing and overpopulating, which meant humans had to then up the elk management and did more killing. In the 1960s, hunters complained too few elk, and congressmen threatened to pull the funding for the park. That's Park Yellowstone. Yellowstone Park. Should have said it that way. So they stopped allowing elk killing, and the population again went too much, and the other animals began to suffer again. So just from that little bit, it seems when you take away the top predator, wolves, you have to keep the grazing animals in check yourself, humans. Not humans being the grazing, humans are the one keeping the elk in check. But that explains why there's so much hunting of deer, elk, pronghorn, etc., etc. But what if you put the wolves back? They did exactly that in 1995. Although, interestingly, again, not without opposition, specifically because there weren't enough protections for the wolves once they leave the park, and because they selected the wrong subspecies of wolves, according to Wyoming and Montana. Just something I found. They did reintroduce the wolves even with that opposition, and what I've heard is that Yellowstone is better for it. I don't know what that senator's problem was or what he has against wolverines in a similar way. I, for one, am not in the mindset that we should be taking the top predators, kill them off entirely so we can take their place. I lean more towards we should give back the space that they need. We're the dominant species, and I think our one and only goal should be on the top and care about everything below us, not just what's best for humans in all situations. But anyway, back to mountain lions. Even if it wasn't listed on the Wikipedia about wolves, I know that common knowledge is that we killed off the wolves because they would kill us, right? That's at least from what I understand. Now, mountain lions attacks is extremely rare. Looking on the Wikipedia page for a list of fatal cougar attacks in North America, mountain lions are also known as cougars, there are 6 in the last 20 years. The last one in Colorado was 1999 and noted this case is highly contentious, and experts vary in opinion as to whether or not this was an official cougar attack. You're looking at that, there's a whole mystery, conspiracy theory kind of thing. I don't want to dive too far down into that, but it's extremely rare that a mountain lion attacks a human. Now, more common, and a bit of my own personal experience here, a mountain lion will attack someone's pet. When I lived up in the Rocky Mountains, this happened several times over the year that I lived there. That seems to be much more common. But however, and again, this is personal experience. I don't have a lot of sources for this stuff. The 3 that I heard of while I was living in that area, I was able to link down to they were attacking people's pets that were off leash. I was able to find 1 or 2 links about that, but not to the specific things, the ones when I was still living there at that time. But I found articles currently from 2024 about a mountain lion that killed a working livestock dog. But even on that news article and all over the other websites that I find, it says keep your pets under control. Roaming pets are easy prey and can attract mountain lions. Bring pets in at night. If you leave your pets outside, keep them in a kennel with a secure top. That seems a lot more likely because, humans, for a mountain lion, seems kind of scary. We're the predator. Why would they do that? But a little dog, or even a big dog, a working livestock dog. It's unfortunate, but that's kind of nature. All right, let's come back yet again to the proposition, however. I find it really interesting that the against arguments mention how this vote would be against science. That's immediately like, whoa, okay, I'm almost always on the side of science. It makes sense. It's logical. But is it? I mean, is it against science, what they're saying there? Because I get what they're saying. The science is wildlife management. But I gotta say, personally, I don't think our current system is working. I think there's a major flaw in that, and we're gonna dive into it a bit here. You know, hunting brings in some ridiculous money. $26 billion annually from one website, but I also found it's also not easy to find this information, but I found $394 billion in the entire U.S. for hunting activities in 2022, according to U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. The state that I live in, Colorado, and mostly what we've been talking about, itself brings in $3 billion a year from hunting. Majority of that is fishing. $843 million from other types of hunting and $2.4 billion from fishing. And that's a lot of money. I wonder where it goes. I had trouble finding specific numbers about that, of course. In 2022, the National Park Service got $3.265 billion, and that sounds like a lot, but it's less than 1% of what was brought in. I don't think it's actually possible for me to find out exactly where all that money goes. I'm not a researcher, just a guy on the internet. But obviously a large portion of that goes back to the retailers for stuff being purchased, right? Guns, ammo, camo, lots of things like that. All the fishing supplies, everything. I'm not going to try to name all of it, but physical items or passes is another part of it. But it's hard to narrow down specifically just the money from hunting licenses. But there's a lot, that's a lot of it. And that's a whole other can of worms is the gun part of it, because as part of this, you can't talk about hunting without gun control. As of all the evidence I've seen whenever it's been brought up of people don't want their guns taken away. And I don't want to go down that subject whatsoever. But enough about that. The topic of where does the money go? Is it like the lottery? Where on the front, they're marketing that, a lot of that money goes towards things like schools or education in general. Good things, some things you can feel good about buying a lottery ticket. But as it turns out, if you go watch the clip that I'm going to put in the description, there's a whole Last Week Tonight segment about the lottery and how, as it turns out, it's actually a pretty small percentage of that money that goes towards those good things that they're so heavily touting. That's not great. So looking for sources. Talking about the money, where does it go? I researched on multiple websites, just like we found out from our last episode, different places that we could go, but I really couldn't find anything specific. I looked all over the place. I found a few things like the Pittman-Robertson Act, the Lacey Act, and there's quite a few of those kind of things that say making sure money is going in the right place. But when I'm trying to find out something specific, again, grain of salt, here we go. I started asking AI. I want to know, this is what I asked AI, I want to know if it's a conflict of interest, given the almost $400 billion industry for hunting, if the people and groups making the rules about who can hunt and how much are directly influenced by the money that would come in from hunting. Wouldn't they be incentivized to make sure hunting is as much as possible? Because that affects their paychecks. AI said this. That's a valid concern. The potential for a conflict of interest does exist, given the significant economic impact of hunting and fishing activities. However, there are several mechanisms in place to mitigate this. Regulatory oversight. Federal and state agencies, such as the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and state wildlife agencies, are tasked with creating and enforcing hunting regulations. These agencies are supposed to bear their decisions on scientific data and conservation principles rather than economic incentives. Public input. Many states require public input and transparency in the rulemaking process. This means that proposed regulations are often subject to public comment periods, hearing and reviews, which can help ensure that decisions are made in the best interest of wildlife conservation rather than economic gain. Conflict of interest codes. Agencies like the California Department of Fish and Wildlife have specific conflict of interest codes to prevent individuals with financial interests in hunting and fishing from influencing regulatory decisions. Independent audits and reviews. Independent audits and reviews can help ensure that regulations are being enforced fairly, and that conservation goals are being met. While these mechanisms are designed to reduce the risk of conflicts of interest, it's important to remain vigilant and ensure that wildlife management decisions are made with the primary goal of conservation and sustainability in mind. So, it seems like it's possible that a conflict of interest that's what I feel, and I could be, but let's be absolutely clear. I have zero evidence that this is the case. I sure hope not. I hope that the practices that are put in place to keep unethical practices like conflict of interest are working exactly like they should. That's common, right? For everything to be working the way it was intended, nobody's found any loopholes. We have a perfect system, right, guys? Right, guys? So one of the major arguments that they've talked about here is taking away funding, the way that hunting brings in money for good things like the parks itself. That's the number one front. I can't say that officially, but everything I have read in my research, that's why hunting is a positive. One, keeping the animals in check, and two, that's where the money comes from, is one of the arguments that we read in that ballot informational booklet. Okay, I get that. Sure, I understand. Currently, the sale of the licenses, the actual hunting itself, the money that comes in from that, and what a hunter has to pay to go hunt, goes towards the state parks and the departments and the things that I enjoy, right? Going out and seeing wildlife in nature and being able to go on public land or being able to go on like state parks and things like that. That money comes from there. I get it. But here's a thought. What if that money came from elsewhere? I mean, you don't get to choose what your taxes go towards. Me personally would certainly prefer a slightly different split between, say, the almost $1 trillion, $820 billion in 2023 going towards the military, and more of that going towards things like wildlife conservation and protection. Kind of seems like it's a cyclical system here. People have to hunt in order to keep certain populations down because we, humans, killed all the predators. People have to hunt in order to provide enough money to the parks and the people working at the parks so that the parks can stay open. If that money came from a different place, it almost seems like it wouldn't be as necessary. But that's just me. This whole thing has been my thoughts and feelings. At this point, I got to tell you, Proposition 127 did not pass. In my opinion, I think that would have been a nice step in the right direction, like they did in California. But it was close. It's a lot closer than I wanted it to be. I could say the same things about a lot of things that were up for vote in November 2024, but hey, some good news. The right to abortion passed. Anyway, it's been a really tough time researching this topic, I gotta be honest with you. My bias going into it, and I obviously wanted to find any evidence to back that up because I am human and a flawed individual, but as with everything we're coming to find out, it's not a cut and dry answer. And to be clear, I recognize I am in the minority and could be flat out wrong about my line of thinking. I am not a complete idiot. I understand that the way that certain things have to be. I had a conversation with my partner about the European starling, which is an invasive species. It's kind of ruining it for a lot of other birds. I'll be honest, I don't like the idea of humans hunting them either. But she was telling me about someone who she saw online, a content creator, who keeps kestrels. The American kestrel, it's a bird, it's a bird of prey, and uses them for the purpose of the invasive species, specifically sending out that to go kill the starlings instead of using a gun or trapping or, things like that. I don't know if that's less cruel or inhumane. I don't know the specifics on that specifically. I feel like if I have to think about how we combat that, that seems like a better way to do it to me, in my opinion. Using something that's already in place would disrupt as little as possible. That is just an opinion. I'm obviously not educated about this, though I'm doing my best to start getting a glimpse of it and to educate myself. I'm trying. This is the whole point of the podcast. It was really rough to research this. Kind of feeling a certain way about a topic beforehand and going in, doing my best to be objective and open to being wrong is very difficult. I admit, and have already at this point, but I continue to admit, I have zero evidence to back up my feelings on this subject. I do question the validity of some of the things that we found today, but isn't asking those questions exactly how the scientific method is supposed to work? As long as you don't blindly stick to your beliefs in the end? Anyway, blindly sticking to my beliefs, I still think that there's alternatives to murdering animals, especially for sport. I know one of the comments against the proposition mentioned trophy hunting isn't legal here in Colorado, but I think, if I understand it right from what I looked up, as long as you're hunting with the intent of using the meat, you can still take the inedible parts and mount them on the wall. And boy, let me tell you, another personal story here. I was in a house once. I was trying to figure out how I make money from photography. I was early starting out. This was back in Wyoming. Rules might be different there, but it completely random. I was reaching out to real estate agencies and going, I'm trying to build my portfolio. Do you have any houses? I'll go take pictures of them. I'll provide you the photos, and then I get to use them in my portfolio. Mutually beneficial. And one of them responded and said, sure, we got a house that hasn't been going anywhere. Go take some pictures of it. And I show up as a guy who's always lived in apartments since I moved out of my dad's house. And I'm like, wow, what a house. And I'm looking around. I'm going, this is great. This is cool. I wonder how much they want for it. I bet way more than I could possibly afford. And then I walk into the trophy room. Dozens of animals on the wall. It was horrifying. Very unexpected. All kinds of different. God, I can see why they. And here's a funny little tidbit. I took pictures of it because I was taking pictures of every room. I was trying my best to display everything in there, and they clearly could not remove them from the wall or did not want to. I don't know if the person who was selling it thought that. Like, why would you want someone else's? I don't get the concept at all as it is to kill an animal and put it on your wall as a point of pride. But do you get pride from having someone else's kill on your wall? I don't get that either. That whole thing boggles my mind, but it was an experience. I was not a huge fan of that. Look, I've been around dead animals before, just to be clear. That within itself doesn't always bother me. I found them out there while I'm doing wildlife. I've come across carcasses and going, oh, I found a half-eaten deer once. Didn't take pictures of that, and I took pictures of it. I didn't share that in part of my vlogs or anything because there are rules about what you can and cannot share on the internet, on YouTube. But anyway, that didn't bother me. Dead animals don't bother me. I grew up, we had an animal pet rescue for guinea pigs when I was growing up. And we had over 100 at one point. That's a lot. That's too many, objectively. But guess what happens when you can't adopt them all out? They don't live all that long. I got used to burying dead animals a long time ago. That's a sad fact of my reality of life. So that's not great. But we weren't killing them. We weren't doing anything. We did our best to give them the longest, happiest life possible, despite the amount that we had. Anyway, we've gotten completely off topic here. Let's get back into it. While we're talking about that, I did find a page about trophy hunting and the influence in conservation. I'll read that off of Wikipedia. The International Union for Conservation of Nature reports that in The Baby and the Bathwater, trophy hunting, conservation, and rural livelihoods that trophy hunting, when well managed, can be sustainable and generate significant economic incentives for the conservation of target species. But there are valid concerns about the legality, sustainability, and ethics of some hunting practices. The paper concludes that in some contexts there may be valid and feasible alternatives to trophy hunting that can deliver the above-mentioned benefits, but identifying, funding, and implementing these require genuine consultation and engagement with affected governments, the private sector, and communities. So it kind of feels like when your main argument is that the benefits hunting can provide and that there are alternatives that could be just as effective, but it would take real work to put into practice, so we just won't? It just feels old. Like, yeah, we used to just kill all the bison to destroy an entire race of people. Or we wouldn't let an entire gender of people vote. We used to segregate the bathrooms and drinking fountains because of skin color. We killed animals for fun when we didn't have a desperate need for the food source anymore. Just, things that you look back on and go, wow, I'm glad we don't do that anymore. Anyway, I guess to sum up, Proposition 127 caught my interest. It made me think harder about a topic that I've never thought that much into, and I've certainly never researched in any meaningful way. And then I created a podcast about learning and answering my own questions. I'm bummed that it didn't pass. I imagine I'm not alone in that, considering that it wasn't very far off. About 10% out of 3 million votes, less than 300,000. So our question of, is it worth saving? Well, I still think is yes. It may not be through this method, but I think we have a responsibility to protect and preserve all life and keep the balance of nature in check as best that we can. Typically, it can take care of itself from some of the resources that we saw today. But when we're the cause of the issues in the first place, I feel like we do have to be the solution in certain ways as well, but that doesn't mean we should be doing it for profit. That doesn't mean we should be doing it to cause unnecessary harm. It's so icky, right? It's messy. It's icky. I don't like how I feel about all this, but this is personal feelings. I have to make that very clear. There is no proof to how I feel. Maybe one day as a society, we'll have the guts, I guess, I don't know how else to put it, to stand up to, well, that's how we've always done it, and we'll make changes for the future, because I see that as a betterment. And maybe I could be right about some things. Maybe there is conflicts of interest. Maybe the science, quote unquote, behind it is not actually accurate because it's being looked at through a conflict of interest to maintain how we've always done it. But to make it clear, I have zero proof of this. I have nothing but feelings on it. And we are not conspiracy theorists. I don't go into conspiracy theorists whatsoever. As soon as something starts going, well, it's a conspiracy theorist, I typically tune out because I go, well, then there's just nothing to back this up. But there have been conspiracy theorists that have come true because the conspiracy theory have it's so messy. There have been instances where that opens a line of questioning and more people start looking into it and go, oh, wait, I actually found this. But if you are going into it under a bad faith argument and I've been proven wrong, I can't continue and I can't in good judgment or belief or in good conscience say that there's any validity to what I'm talking about. It could all entirely just spawn from the point of, I feel bad. And I could be entirely wrong. It could 100% be that we have to kill these animals in order to keep them in check. It's entirely possible. It just doesn't feel right. It really, inside when I'm thinking about it, I just think there's a better way. I think there's another way that parks can survive without it. I think there are better ways by reintroducing predators back into the environment and giving them back their space. And look, we did a whole episode last time about how we as humans have taken too much from the earth. Are we taking too much wildlife? I don't know. Kind of feels that way. Kind of feels like we're having an effect all the way across everything. But anyway, that's all I got. That was the research that I did. It was a difficult topic. As I said before, it's really difficult to go into something and go, well, I feel this way about it, so that must be right. And it's not. It cannot possibly be. You can't just go off of that. There may be nuggets of truth in there. It may be a gray area. Like we said, it's complicated. Maybe there's a bit of both. Maybe conservation is necessary and humans have to take hold of it, but that doesn't mean that there's no killing at all. Maybe it just has to be greater steps. I mean, I wound up cutting out of this, and I don't want to mention too far into it because I didn't go down the research enough to feel comfortable talking about it. So I'll just briefly mention it. I heard about something and I could not find information. I don't understand how I couldn't find it about. I even went to AI and said, here's what I'm thinking. Can you please back me up by telling me what I'm thinking of? Because I know I remember hearing a story. I just can't remember what it was. And it wasn't like some random weird article. It was across, I read it in multiple ways and had heard about it multiple times. And it's one of the states, I don't remember which one, had suddenly reintroduced the killing of an animal that had been completely outlawed. Like we were talking about, the lynx has just been protected and not allowed to be killed. And I don't remember if it was wolves or a certain type of bear or something, but they opened it up. It was just a couple years ago. They went, okay, we're going to allow the killing of this animal again, and people are allowed to hunt it. And then just through some oopsies, I don't know how else to describe it, they didn't regulate it good enough, and people killed way more than they were supposed to. I don't know the exact numbers, and I don't want to start guessing on what it was because I can't remember all the details, and for some reason I'm having trouble finding information for that. But like, flawed system? Feels like it. Really feels like there's got to be a better way to do that in certain ways. And it really feels like it was maybe wolves or something along those lines, because it was something that would have been a predator. But I couldn't. I looked up killing wolves in different states and I couldn't. There was something that, like, it was a more recent thing. Again, I don't have this in my notes now, so I can't talk specifically about it, even in a vague research way like I do. But there was something that was like, they just passed a law in Montana, I want to say. But that wasn't, it was years ago. And I can't remember where it came from. But anyway, there's definitely flaws in the system no matter what, right? And it's not great. And I do have my own personal opinions about this whole thing. I don't know how to separate those out entirely because I am a human being and that it's messy, but I have to accept that based on everything I was able to research and find, the best I can find is that it's messy. There are arguments on both sides of this, and there's probably always going to be arguments on both sides of everything because there is no cut and dry, everyone agrees on anything. That's never been the case. I personally hope that we see more introductions of this. We see that it just kind of falls out of fashion, hunting in general. I really think that there are better ways to do it, and I think we should accept that. I get that we are in the situation we're in, and the best situation that we're, like, the best way to handle the situation that we're in is probably the system that we're currently on, but that doesn't necessarily mean that, that's the best actual outcome for a better goal of entire planet-wide stability. I mean, that's like, look, I'm trying not to make it about, I don't eat meat mostly. Mostly. I've cut out, it used to be an every meal thing. And I've really tried to cut that back. That was for no reason regarding to this, just to say, I wanted to see if I could. It happened back in 2020. For 5 years now, I've been I don't like terms, I don't like labels or anything, but as close to being vegetarian, I suppose. But I just don't eat meat. It really wasn't that hard. There's plant-based alternatives. So I at the very least can say confidently that beans and mushrooms do pretty good and plant-based alternatives work pretty well. And that has nothing to do with anything. This is a little tidbit here at the end, I suppose, of like, yes, I do feel like we don't need to be killing as many animals just across the board. Not only, livestock for food, for that stuff. I personally don't think so. But there's just this, I've talked to people and like, that's their reaction. Like, their immediate reaction to see a beautiful deer grazing in a field is to think, wish I could kill that and stuff it in my freezer. And I don't really care for that. That definitely warped my view as well. I admit that helps the bias of like, ooh, we have very different reactions as human beings. I don't see the beauty of the nature and the landscape and think murder. But maybe that's just me. And I'm in the minority here. I've said that. I'm just repeating myself, so I got to wrap it up here. I don't have anything poignant. I don't have any kind of resolution being like, yeah, we're going to do this. This is just one man talking, and that's my opinions on the matter. I have my own opinions, but I also recognize that my opinions can be wrong. That's the best I can say here off of this stuff, is that even though I feel a certain way, and I hope that better people out there than me feel similarly, and they are able to research this better and able to open up lines of questionings and like look into it and at least verify, it'd be cool to make sure that that's what it is, because there's a lot in today's society of just like, God, it goes down this whole rabbit hole that I didn't want to go into, but I just feel like it's right there, of flat earth and people questioning a conspiracy theory of whether or not the earth is flat. And all the science says, no, of course not. And I don't believe that at all. And I feel for the people who do, because that inquisitive nature of wanting to ask those questions is one thing. And then so blindly believing that that's going to be the case even when you're proven wrong, I don't want to be that. I don't want, and I recognize that by even questioning after I just read all the science, quote unquote, about it, see, even I put quote unquote, I can't help it because it just seems wrong. But I don't want to be on that level. I don't want to be on the same level as, well, objectively wrong with that. But I do think that it's icky and messy. I said it, like it really, there's another side to this. Is there? I don't know. I don't know what, like, I've just gotten way off topic here. I really, it went down. This was a really tough one to research. I said it. I just continue repeating myself with like, I think there's a line between questioning and then blindly accepting. And I don't want to blindly accept. I do want to question, and I want to continue to question, but I accept at this point in time that I have nothing to back up how I feel. How I feel is that we shouldn't be doing what we're doing. I feel like that's bad for the environment, like with the lead that we talked about. I feel like it's bad for the actual, the back and forth. Look up that Yellowstone thing. Really, that to me, and I do not understand that senator's opinion. That doesn't make any sense to me. He's like, we shouldn't be letting the majority of people vote on it. What if the majority of people are right? I get that maybe it's not, and there's certainly things that the majority of people vote on that I completely disagree with. But I think there's a lot of, well, if I just quote and say that it's science, I don't have to back it up with anything. Or if the science is wrong, we don't have to quote that. Like, we don't go into talking about that either. You just go, well, this is what the science says. Well, I suppose if I was trying to make a difference here, I am way off script. If I was trying to make a point with what I was saying before, and I feel like I have to at least try to acknowledge that, is that flat Earth, I have not done a ton of research into that. And to be honest with you, it doesn't interest me. So I highly doubt we're going to do an episode on that or anything. But like, from what I heard, there were people trying to prove it using science, scientists who then proved themselves wrong and proved that flat Earth is not a thing and continued to believe it anyway, even despite the science being there. The science, it's just a term we throw around now. And that's exactly what, like, the arguments against that proposition were like, this is going against the science. The science says this, the science says that. Science can be wrong, though. That's the point of it. That's not the point of it, but the way it works is that it's questioned. There are reliable methods to continue researching, and in order to, I'm reminded of a scene from Always Sunny in Philadelphia where they're arguing God against science, religion against science, and that quote kind of sticks in my head. I don't remember the full thing, unfortunately, but it's something about how like science is repeatable methods that can be tested, as opposed to like you just have a belief in it. But their entire point is like, well, you just believe that someone better and smarter than you, the scientists, have proven this, and you just go, well, I believe in science. How is that different from a belief in religion? Well, those methods that, like, in theory, if you understand the basis, you would be able to repeatedly check. I don't know if that is necessarily the same thing involved in the wildlife conservation that we've been talking about, because I don't know the science behind it. I understand on a basic level how when we kill the top predator, we have to replace that, or the bottom, the prey animals take over and the elk graze all the berries, and then that hurts the birds who don't get it, and then the plants hurt from that, and like it shapes the entire landscape. I get that. It makes sense. So what if we put the wolves back? I don't have much else. Let's just end it here. I think that's the best we can really do. Realistically, I wasn't going to come to some kind of grand conclusion or poke holes in something and go, oh, let's follow the money and find where it goes. Oh, look, it's all lining the pockets of big ammo or something. I hope that someone better than me can do something like that and it actually turns out, because that'd be cool. That, not to be right, I don't care. That'd be cool that the animals would be able to stop being killed unnecessarily. But it's not going to happen. Let's be realistic about that. It's been a practice in this country since the beginning. And it's been used in negative ways, and it's been used in positive ways. I mentioned killing the bison. That was horrible. I saw a bison not too long ago. We are way off track. I have nothing else to contribute to this. I have to end it. I'm so sorry. Thanks for listening or watching if you're on the Patreon. This is me answering my own questions. This is me trying to better myself and learn and research, and this one was a really tough one to do. Because instead of going into it with an open mind entirely and willing to learn whatever I found and go, okay, cool, it very much came at it with a bias of, I really want this to be the answer that I'm able to figure out, and then go, haha, I can justify my feelings. And I was not able to do that. And it's a bummer. But it is disingenuous to say anything other than that. If I walk away from this recording and go, well, but no, there is no proof to what I feel. And I just have to accept that and hope that the science turns out to be wrong and that the other methods and that other ways could do it, because we read right on there. There was that little glimmer of hope of, actually, there could be other ways to do all these things and claim all the same benefits, but they're kind of hard to do, you guys. That seems like a poor excuse. As humans, we should just do better. If we're going to be the dominant species, is it not our responsibility to be the dominant species and not just wipe out everything? Isn't that something that, like, the fear of aliens, if there are aliens out there, they won't be friendly. They'll want to come in and kill everyone and kill us. Like, are we not better than that? Is that, it's a weird thing. I don't know why we got into aliens. Anyway, This has been Is It Worth Saving? A whole mix of an episode with emotions ranging this way and that. And that's the best I got. This was what got me started on it. I read about this. I read the proposition. I read the for and against. And I went, this is really interesting. I feel a certain way based on this, but I shouldn't just go on my feelings. I should start researching further. And that was the basis for creating a podcast to talk about these things and try to better myself and try to educate myself. I learned stuff today for sure in the research. Maybe you did too. That's what all this is about. As I started talking before, there is a Patreon in case you're interested. I'm trying to figure out how to put ads on this thing so I can maybe make some money one day off of it. But for the time being, there isn't. And I don't know when it will be. But if you want more behind the scenes, the entire uncut adventure along this journey, patreon.com/QWOFT. I think. I just made that up off the top of my head. I'm pretty sure that's the URL. If not, it's in the description for real. Hope that's right. Bye, everybody.